Somewhere below the last thin shimmer of sunlight, the water turns the colour of deep evening, then the colour of ink, and then a darkness so complete that it has its own weight. Picture yourself sinking downward without effort, the surface forgotten far above, the cold a blanket laid across your skin rather than a sting. There is no rush here, and there never has been. The pressure that would crush a submarine wraps around the creatures who live in it like an old friend, and they go about their unhurried business as though the dark were the most natural home in the world. Tiny lights blink on and off in the distance, dim as fireflies seen through fog. Something enormous moves past, far away, and the water carries only the faintest pulse of its passing, a long wave that fades before it ever reaches you. The dark down here is not empty, and it is not frightening. It is simply old and full and at peace, the way a deep forest holds its breath at the very middle of the night, brimming with more life than the eye could ever count. You do not need to remember any of this. Let the words move over you the way the current moves over the stones below without asking anything in return. There is nothing to hold, nothing to study, nothing to keep. The mind can loosen its grip on the day, finger by finger, until even the holding falls away. What stays with you by morning will be exactly enough, and what slips away was never yours to carry. Let your shoulders grow low and heavy. Let the jaw unclench. Let the ocean think for you tonight, while you do nothing at all but sink by degrees into the deep blue hush of rest. Here the light begins to fail. Sunlight reaches surprisingly far into clear water, but it weakens with every metre, scattered and swallowed, until by the time you descend past about 200 metres, almost all of it is gone. Scientists call the dim layer just beneath the sunlit surface the twilight zone, and it stretches down to roughly 1,000 metres, a blue-grey hall where the last faint photons dissolve into nothing. Even in the clearest tropical water, only about 1 part in 100 of the surface light still reaches 100 metres down, and what little survives below that is blue and dim and steadily failing, until at last there is none at all that a human eye could ever name. In this long corridor, the animals have eyes that are enormous for their bodies, built to gather the smallest crumbs of light, and many of them are silver or deep red, because in the blue gloom those particular colours simply vanish from sight. It is a place of permanent dusk, neither day nor night but an endless evening, and the creatures here have learned to read shadows the way we read faces, finding meaning in the faintest change of grey. The water is so clear and so undisturbed that the blue light, what little remains of it, comes only from straight above, falling like a single beam through an immense hall, so that every creature lives beneath one dim and distant window. To descend through it would feel like moving through the last hour before sleep, when the room has gone dark but the dark has not yet fully come, and everything blurs at the edges. Below the twilight the true black begins, and here lives a fact that loosens something in the mind. The deep ocean is the largest living space on the entire planet. When people imagine the world full of life, they tend to picture forests and grasslands and bright coral reefs, the thin, warm skin of the surface where the sun touches down. But more than 90% of the room available for life on Earth lies hidden in the deep sea, in the immense cold volume of water beneath the waves. Almost everything that breathes and moves and glows does so out of our sight, far below, in the most spacious and least visited country there has ever been. The world we know is only the bright lid on a vast dark room, and that room is alive from top to bottom, filled corner to corner with slow-moving life. If you measured every habitat where any living thing might dwell, and stacked all that volume into one great total, the sunlit lands and shallow seas would be only the thinnest bright rind around an immense shadowed sphere of water. There is a strange comfort in being so small a part of something so large, a single listener at the edge of an ocean that hardly knows we're here. The average depth of the sea is around 3.5 kilometres, and nearly all of that immense volume is cold and black, so that the living room of the planet is measured not across in acres, but down in miles. In that great dark country, the The ground itself stretches farther and flatter than any plane you could ever walk. The abyssal plains, the wide level floors that cover much of the deep ocean, are among the smoothest and most even surfaces anywhere on Earth, blanketed in a fine pale sediment that has been settling, undisturbed, for millions upon millions of years. The sediment is the texture of face powder and the colour of weak tea, and it lies in a layer hundreds of meters thick, soft enough to swallow a footprint whole. This sediment falls so unhurriedly, sometimes only a few millimeters across 1,000 years, that a single mark pressed into it could remain unchanged for longer than all of human history. There are no storms to scour it, no footsteps to cross it, no seasons to turn it over. These broad plains cover well over half of the planet's whole solid surface, more ground than every continent and island laid out together, and yet hardly any human eye has ever once looked upon them directly. Walking there, if you could somehow walk, would feel like crossing fresh fallen snow that no one has ever touched. A pale field reaching away in every direction into the black, perfectly still, perfectly hushed, waiting without any need to be found. From that unhurried snowfall comes a tender idea to rest against. Much of the material drifting down to the seafloor is called marine snow, an endless flurry of tiny pale particles, the remains of plankton, flecks of dust, the leftovers of all the life near the bright surface above. It falls for days, sometimes for weeks, to reach the bottom, sinking through layer after layer of black, and for the creatures waiting below it is a feast delivered from a world they will never see. The sunlit ocean far above feeds the lightless depths far below, grain by grain, flake by flake, in an unhurried rain that never quite stops, never rushes, and never fails. A single flake of this snow might take a week or more to sink all the way down, turning as it sinks, gathering smaller flecks to itself along the way until it arrives at last on the floor, as a gift no one announced. A single flake might be no wider than a grain of rice, yet take a fortnight to fall, sinking at the unhurried speed of a snowflake in still air, soft and grey and faintly sticky to the touch. Even now, in the black of the deep, this snow is falling, drifting down through the hush, and the listening mind can fall with it, weightless, settling toward rest. Some of the animals that wait for this rain have made a kind of gift of the dark itself, turning its emptiness into a stage for their own light. The deep sea is the most bioluminescent place on the planet, and it is thought that the great majority of animals living in the open ocean depths can produce their own glow. Blue sparks, glowing necklaces of light, sudden cold bursts of brightness, rippling lines, all of it made by living chemistry rather than heat, light born inside the body and given freely to the dark. In a realm where the sun never once arrives, life simply decided to bring its own lamps, scattering the blackness with countless small living stars. The glow itself is cold to the touch, made when two chemicals meet inside the body and release their energy almost entirely as light rather than as heat, so efficiently that barely a trace of warmth escapes. To move among them would be to float through a silent galaxy, each tiny light a creature being itself in the deep. One of those lamps belongs to a hunter who carries her own little star before her. The anglerfish, hanging in the black water, dangles a glowing lure out in front of her mouth, a small bead of light bobbing in the dark to draw curious prey closer. The light is not entirely hers, though. It comes from tiny bacteria living inside the lure, a partnership written over millions of years, two utterly different kinds of life agreeing to share a single small flame. The lure glows a pale blue-green, the exact colour that carries farthest through seawater, bright enough to catch a curious eye yet too faint to show the great dark mouth waiting just behind it. The fish offers the bacteria a safe and steady home. The bacteria offer the fish a beacon in the endless dark. There are scores of different anglerfish scattered through the deep, and each kind tends to carry its own particular shape of lure, some like a tiny lantern, some like a slender wand, some branching into glowing threads, so that the dark holds a whole gallery of these living lights. In all that blackness, that one glow is both an invitation and a wonder, a single star held on the end of a living line, unhurried, waiting in the deep with the calm of something that has all the time in the world. Far below the level where any anglerfish hunts, the water grows colder, and here is a thought to settle into. Across most of the deep ocean, the temperature hovers just a few degrees above freezing, a steady chill that barely shifts from one end of the year to the other, or even from one century to the next. While the surface world spins through summers and winters, through storms and heat and shifting seasons, the deep keeps its own unchanging weather, a stillness so reliable that the creatures within it have never once needed to imagine warmth or worry over cold to come. There is a deep and simple peace in something that stays the same, that asks nothing of you and promises nothing, that has been exactly as it is for longer than memory and will be exactly so long after. The whole middle and lower ocean, taken together, sits at a temperature only a little above the freezing point of fresh water, a single cool note held steady across the entire planet. The same off the coast of every continent, the same beneath the tropics as beneath the poles. Lower a thermometer anywhere into that deep water, and it will read close to 2 degrees above freezing, a single cold number repeated around the whole curve of the Earth. The tired mind reaches toward that constancy, the way a hand reaches toward a warm and familiar wall in the dark. In that unchanging cold, time itself seems to thin, and some of the residents take their time to a degree that is almost hard to believe. Certain deep-sea creatures live astonishingly long lives. A small fish called the orange ruffy can survive for well over a century, moving unhurried through the dark for longer than most human lifetimes, and there are deep corals and sponges thought to be thousands of years old, some of them among the very oldest living things on Earth. In the cold dark, where food arrives only when it happens to fall, and the body has little reason to ever hurry, life simply stretches out serene, measuring its days not in seasons but in slowly accumulating ages. Scientists can read these long lives the way one reads the rings of a tree, counting faint growth bands laid down year by year in tiny stones within the ear or in the layers of a coral, and the count keeps climbing past 50, past 100, past every guess they first brought with them. To imagine living so unhurriedly, with nothing to rush toward and nothing to flee, is to feel the very idea of haste loosen and fall away, leaving only the long calm of time itself. And these old unhurried lives are sustained by something almost too delicate to picture. Many deep-sea animals survive on remarkably little, their bodies finely tuned to scarcity, their movements careful and economical, their hunger endlessly forbearing. Some can go for long stretches between meals, hanging and waiting in the dark, spending almost nothing, asking almost nothing at all of the world around them. It is a way of living that the bright surface, with all its rushing and gathering and reaching, very rarely sees. Down here, less is not loss, and waiting is not suffering. There is simply enough, arriving in its own time, and the body has learned to be content with exactly that. As you listen, you may notice your own breath beginning to slacken to match it, asking for nothing, holding nothing, content to rest in the gentle hush between one moment and the next, needing only this much, only this breath, only this stillness. Let the mind sink a little further into water that has not felt any warmth for longer than we can truly imagine. There is a single great body of cold that connects the bottoms of all the world's oceans, a dark river of dense, frigid water that creeps along the deep floor from one end of the planet to the other. This vast circulation, sometimes called the global conveyor belt, can take roughly 1,000 years to complete just a single full loop, sinking near the icy poles, sliding silently across the abyss, and finally rising again, ages later, in some distant and unsuspecting sea. The water touching the deep floor tonight may last have met the open sky when the first great cathedrals were being raised stone by stone by people long since gone, and it will not feel fresh air again for centuries still to come. The whole loop is driven by the smallest of differences, water that grows just a little colder and a little saltier near the poles, and therefore just a little heavier, sinking quietly out of sight to begin its long journey along the bottom of the world. It moves without any hurry at all, carrying cold and memory together in the same current, a steady pulse beneath everything that lives and rushes above. To rest your imagination on that unhurriedness is to feel 1,000 years pass as easily as a single breath. Riding along that steady pulse, in places where the floor of the sea splits open, the planet offers up a kind of warmth that life has learned to gather around and love. Along the long seams where the seabed is slowly pulling apart, hot mineral-rich water gushes up from cracks called hydrothermal vents, sometimes hot enough to shimmer and glow, building tall dark chimneys out of dissolved metals that harden the moment they meet the cold. Around these vents, in total darkness, whole thriving communities live and grow without any sunlight at all, fed not by the distant sun but by the deep chemistry of the earth itself. It was a discovery that quietly rewrote the oldest rules of life. Here, far down on the black floor, gardens bloom around warmth and fire rather than around light. Until these vents were first found, almost everyone had assumed that all life everywhere depended in the end on sunlight. And then, a small crude submersible dropped into the dark and its lights fell upon a thriving crowd of creatures clustered around a warm chemical spring, and a whole new way of living quietly entered the world's understanding. To picture them is to picture a hearth at the bottom of the world, with life gathered close around it in the dark, warm and unhurried, and at home. In those vent gardens grows a creature so strange that it seems half dreamed into being. The giant tube worm stands in red and white forests near the hot springs of the deep, taller sometimes than a person, swaying without any eyes or mouth or stomach to call its own. It cannot eat in any ordinary way at all. Instead, it shelters billions of tiny bacteria deep inside its body, and those bacteria turn the raw minerals of the vent into nourishment, feeding their enormous host from within. The worm offers them a safe, warm home and a steady supply of chemicals drawn up from the earth. They offer it in return its entire life. Two utterly different beings, fused into one single act of survival, growing peacefully together in the dark beside the warm breath of the planet, neither one able to live without the other, both perfectly content with the arrangement. The worm even carries a special crimson blood, rich and bright, that can hold on to both the oxygen of the cold water and the chemicals of the vent at the very same time, ferrying each inward to the bacteria that wait within. That deep red is why the forests of them look, from a distance, as though they have been tipped with flame, a field of pale stalks crowned in quiet fire, swaying together in water that never stops moving. Each white tube can stand taller than a grown person, capped by a plume the deep red of arterial blood, and a single thicket may hold thousands of them packed close as reeds along a riverbank. Even where there are no vents to gather around, the deep floor finds its own ways to feast. When a great whale dies, after a long life in the bright upper sea, and sinks at last all the way down to the bottom, it brings a banquet to a world that rarely sees one arrive. Scientists call this event a whale fall, and a single fallen body can feed a thriving crowd of deep-sea creatures for decades, an entire small living world rising up around the bones. First come the swift scavengers, drawn from far across the dark by the scent. Then come the slow bone eaters. Then come strange, specialized creatures that arrive for nothing else in all the world. One ending becomes a town, a garden, a long, slow celebration in the dark, life pouring outward from a single death, as steadily as light pouring through a window at dusk. The richness of a single great whale, gathered over a long life of feeding in the upper sea, can equal many years' worth of the marine snow that would otherwise drift down to that same patch of floor, so its arrival is less a meal than a sudden season of plenty. The flesh may be gone in months, but the great oily skeleton can go on feeding life for 50 years or more, longer than the whale itself was ever alive. And because such falls are rare and scattered, some of the small creatures that gather at them are found nowhere else at all, wandering from one fallen feast to the next, living their whole lives in the spaces between gifts. Even an ending, the deep seems to say, is only another beginning, softly arriving. Among those who come to such feasts are creatures whose appetites are larger than their small bodies should ever allow. In the lean depths, where a meal might not appear for a very long time, some fish have slowly evolved stomachs that can stretch to hold prey even larger than themselves. The black swallower, a small dark fish of the deep, can engulf a creature several times its own size, its belly ballooning out to make room for a meal it could never have expected to find. It is not greed, exactly, but a kind of deep wisdom. When food is rare, you take everything the dark happens to offer and you carry it with you. The deep teaches a calm opportunism, a quiet readiness to receive whatever gift the current may bring, however unlikely, however large, and to be grateful and full and still afterward. Its dark, stretchy stomach is so generous that, seen with a light, a recently fed black swallower looks as though it has swallowed a second fish whole and simply carried it along, the outline of the meal visible right through the thin skin of the belly. It is a body shaped entirely around uncertainty, around never quite knowing when the next meal will drift past, and so built to hold an entire windfall the moment one appears. Some of the dark's offerings glow as they fall, and some glow only as a sudden means of escape. When threatened in the open black water, certain deep-sea shrimp do something quietly extraordinary. They spit a bright cloud of glowing blue light out into the water, a sudden burst of brilliance that startles and confuses a predator while the shrimp slips away into the dark. It is the opposite of an octopus releasing a cloud of dark ink in the bright shallows. Here, in a world that is already black, the clever trick is to release sudden light instead of sudden shadow. A flash of living fire, a single moment of dazzled confusion, and then the deep hush returns, the would-be hunter left blinking and blinded by light in a place that almost never knows it. Some of these shrimp can even let the glowing cloud trail off behind them as they retreat, so that the predator strikes at a hanging ghost of light while the shrimp itself fades away into the safe black untouched. It is a defense made entirely of brightness in a world built of darkness, the gentlest possible weapon, harming nothing, only dazzling for a heartbeat and then dissolving back into the night. Other creatures use their light not to flee, but to disappear from sight entirely. Many animals living in the twilight zone glow softly along their undersides, a clever trick called counter-illumination, matching the faint light filtering down from far above so that their dark silhouettes simply vanish against the glow. To a hungry predator looking up from below, hoping to spot a shape against the dim ceiling of the sea, they melt away and become nothing at all, invisible not by hiding in shadow, but by carrying just enough light to erase themselves. It is camouflage woven entirely out of glow, a way of becoming nothing by shining, and there is something almost tender in the thought of a small creature making itself disappear by lighting its own belly, vanishing into the light of the sea above it. The most careful of these animals can even sense how bright the water overhead happens to be at any moment, and dim or brighten their own underside lights to match it exactly, so that as a passing cloud far above thins or thickens the daylight, their glow rises and falls to keep them invisible. To hide by shining, to vanish by giving off light rather than by hiding from it, is among the deep's strangest and loveliest solutions, a quiet reversal of everything we expect of shadow. In this same dim middle water lives a fish whose very head seems to have been made of clear glass. The barrel-y fish carries a transparent fluid-filled dome over the whole top of its skull, and through that clear window its strange tubular eyes look straight upward, watching for the faint shapes of prey passing somewhere overhead against the last of the failing light. For a very long time no one even knew the dome was there, because it would break and collapse as the delicate fish were drawn up toward the surface. Then, at last, a camera in the deep revealed it, whole and intact and faintly luminous, and a creature that had only ever seemed merely strange became suddenly, quietly beautiful. a small fish with a clear glass roof over its mind, gazing forever upward through the dark toward a light it can only just barely see. Its glowing green eyes can even rotate within that fluid dome, tilting from straight up to straight ahead so that when it finally spots a morsel hanging above it, can turn its gaze forward to follow the food down to its own mouth without ever losing sight of it. The clear shield over its head, it is thought, may even protect those delicate eyes from the stinging tendrils of the jelly creatures it sometimes steals its meals from, a helmet of living glass worn against a small danger. The fish itself is only about 15 centimeters long, hanging motionless in the black with two glowing green orbs gazing straight up through the clear dome of its own forehead, watching the faint ceiling of the sea for a passing shadow. Not far away, in the cold blue middle of the open sea, drifts an animal that may be the longest creature anywhere on Earth. The giant siphonophore is not one single body at all, but a whole colony of countless tiny individuals, all linked together into one shimmering living thread. Some specimens stretching longer than a great whale, longer than many tall buildings stood on end. It hangs in the water like a delicate, endless string of glass beads, pulsing faintly, turning in slow spirals through the dark, each tiny part doing its own small job for the good of the whole. A creature so long it could outreach the largest animal alive, and yet so fine and so fragile that it seems woven from nothing more than light and water, trailing through the deep without effort, unhurried, a single living ribbon adrift in the black. The many small bodies that make it up are not all alike either. Some are shaped only to swim, pulsing to move the whole colony along, while others are shaped only to feed, or only to help it reproduce, each tiny part giving up every other task to do one thing perfectly for the good of all. It is less a single animal than a floating community that has agreed, over deep time, to live and move forever as one, so wholly joined that no single part could ever survive alone. Let that strange length unspool slowly in your mind, and let the body grow a little heavier where it rests, as the deep keeps offering its surprises one after another. Far down, in waters that almost never see a visitor of any kind, lives a small octopus so endearing that scientists chose to name it after a cartoon elephant. The Dumbo octopus has two soft fins on the top of its head that flap like a pair of little ears as it hovers above the seafloor, steering through the dark with the most delicate motions imaginable. It lives deeper than almost any other octopus in the world, far down in cold black water well below the reach of even the faintest light, and it moves through that immense hush with a grace so unhurried that it looks less like swimming than like floating peacefully through a dream. Rather than darting along the way its shallow water cousins do, it flaps those soft fins and spreads the thin web between its arms like a small parachute or a slowly opening umbrella, sinking and rising again with the very smallest of movements. A mother Dumbo octopus does not even wait for a single season to lay her eggs. She carries the beginnings of many at once within her, releasing them one by one over time onto the seafloor, so that in the changeless deep she is always quietly ready, whenever the moment is right. These small octopuses have been seen as far as 7 kilometers down, deeper than any other of their kind, their bodies pale and soft and no longer than a hand, rising off the bottom with a single slow stroke of those ear-like fins. Let go now, soft as those little ears, unhurried as that drifting, asking nothing of the next moment but to arrive on its own. Stay with that drifting softness, because the deep keeps unfolding wonders that ask nothing of you at all but to be imagined. Far down in the cold middle water lives a small jellyfish that may have unlocked a kind of endlessness. When this delicate creature is injured or grows old, it can transform its own cells and slip backward to an earlier stage of its life, beginning all over again as if newly born, a loop that can repeat under the right conditions. People have called it the immortal jellyfish, not because it can never die at all, but because it has somehow found a way to step backward out of old age and begin once more fresh and young. It does this by a quiet kind of inner alchemy. its grown cells changing back into younger forms, the way a butterfly might somehow soften back into a caterpillar, the whole creature settling onto a surface and becoming once more the small, budding stalk it began as. From that new beginning it can grow up all over again, and so, under the right conditions, the same small life may pass through its own youth and age many times over. In the calm of the deep black, time itself seems to bend into a circle, and an ending becomes, instead, an unhurried new beginning, a quiet return to the start. The whole creature is scarcely 4 millimeters across, smaller than a lentil, its bell clear as glass and rimmed with fine threads, so faint a thing that it could pass a hand without ever being seen. That looping little creature is no larger than a fingernail, and its smallness is part of a much wider truth about the deep. Most of the animals that fill the vast dark ocean are tiny, far smaller than the great giants that so easily capture our imagination. Swarms of little lanternfish, no longer than a single finger, are thought to be among the most abundant vertebrates on the entire planet, their numbers reaching somewhere into the trillions, their rows of light freckling the twilight water with a faint and endless sparkle. The deep is not, after all, mostly monsters. It is mostly multitudes, a vast crowd of small glowing lives, each one a single flicker in an ocean filled to the brim with flickers. There are so very many lanternfish, in fact, that together they are thought to make up a huge share of all the fish in the entire sea by sheer weight. An almost unimaginable living mass spread thinly through the twilight water all around the globe. They are small and easily overlooked, and yet they feed much of the larger life of the open ocean, the foundation on which the bigger and more famous creatures all depend. By some estimates, lanternfish and their kin make up the better part of all the fish in the sea by weight, a living mass measured in the hundreds of millions of tons, spread so thinly through the dark that you might pass a single one only now and then. To picture them all at once is to picture a living snowstorm of light, sifting through the dark, uncountable and calm. Each evening this enormous crowd performs the single largest movement of life anywhere on Earth, and it happens almost entirely unseen by us. As darkness falls across the surface above, countless small creatures rise upward from the depths to feed, in the safer black of night, then sink down again before the first light of dawn, a daily journey scientists call the vertical migration. So many animals take part in it together that the total mass of living things moving up and down each day dwarfs every human migration in all of history combined. The ocean breathes, in a way, lifting its small lives toward the surface and then lowering them once more into the deep, a living tide of creatures rising and falling endlessly with the turning of the world. So vast is this nightly procession that the early makers of sound mapping instruments once mistook it for the seafloor itself, a false bottom that puzzled them by rising toward the surface each evening and sinking away again each dawn, until they realized they were watching not the ground at all, but a living layer of countless small animals on the move, to climb hundreds of meters upward through the dark and then sink all the way back down again. Every single night of a life is for these tiny creatures the longest of daily journeys, undertaken in silence, guided only by the fading and returning of the light. Some climb 400 or 500 meters upward each dusk and sink the same distance again each dawn, a march that for a finger-length fish is the same, in its own scale, as a person walking many kilometers up out of a valley and back down every single night. It is the heartbeat of the sea, steady, repeating every single night. Sound, too, travels through this dark world in ways that feel almost magical, and here is a fact to rest the imagination upon. In certain layers of the deep ocean, where temperature and pressure align together just so, sound becomes trapped and can travel for thousands of kilometers with very little fading at all. This natural sound channel can carry the low call of a whale across an entire ocean basin, from the waters off one continent all the way to the waters off another, a single voice reaching impossibly far through the cold black. Somewhere right now, even as you rest, a deep song is crossing the sea through this hidden corridor, travelling on and on through the dark, and the water itself is the great listening room that holds it. Sound moves through water far faster than it moves through air, more than 4 times as quickly, gliding through the sea in great smooth strides, and within this special channel it loses almost none of its strength as it goes, bending back toward the middle whenever it begins to stray up or down. In seawater, sound travels close to 1,500 meters every second, so a whale's call can cross 100 kilometers of ocean in little more than a minute, while its echo off a distant slope may not return for 2. Long ago, those who first studied this hidden layer found that a small sound set off within it could be heard halfway around the world days later on the far side of an ocean. The deep is never truly silent. It is full of unhurried voices passing through it, farther than any voice could ever travel through the air. The voices that fill that corridor can be deeper and lower than anything our ears were ever built to hear. The lowest calls of the great whales are so very low in pitch that they brush against the very edge of human hearing, long rumbles that carry enormous distances through the deep water without weakening. These sounds are not loud in any startling or sudden way. They are broad and patient, more felt than truly heard, travelling through hundreds of kilometres of cold water to find another of their own kind somewhere in the dark. To hang in the deep and feel one of these calls pass through you would be like feeling the entire ocean murmur in its sleep, a sound far older and far broader than any words, a low vibration that the body would feel more in the chest than in the ears, soothing as a heartbeat heard from very close. The great whales sing these unhurried songs in patterns that can last for many minutes, and then repeat, phrase after phrase, a structure so steady that those who listen call it song without hesitation, and whole populations may share and slowly change the same melody together over the years. A single low note from one of these animals may travel for hundreds of kilometers before it fades, so that 2 whales need never come close to keep one another company, calling back and forth across an entire dark sea, each one a distant voice in the other's quiet world. Listening always for those calls is a creature whose whole body is built around the language of sound. The sperm whale dives deeper than almost any other air-breathing animal on Earth, descending into cold black water far below the reach of light to hunt, holding a single great breath for the better part of an hour at a time. To find its prey in that total darkness, it sends out powerful clicks and then carefully reads the echoes that come returning, mapping the entire unseen world around it by sound alone, painting the dark in pulses. It carries the loudest voice of any animal alive, and yet it uses that astonishing voice not to frighten or to threaten, but simply to see, drawing pictures of the deep in clicks and echoes, finding its way through the endless black by patiently, carefully listening. It is a hunter, yes, but a gentle and attentive one, navigating an invisible world through sound. The great square head of the sperm whale, which can make up nearly a third of its whole long body, is filled largely with the very apparatus of sound, a vast natural instrument of oil and air that focuses its clicks into a fine beam and aims them out into the dark ahead. These animals dive deeper than almost any other creature that must return to the surface to breathe, sometimes sinking far more than a kilometre down and staying below for the better part of an hour on a single held breath, slowing their own hearts to spend their air with the greatest of care. A diving sperm whale may drop past 2,000 meters and stay down for 90 minutes, its heartbeat falling to a handful of beats each minute, its chest collapsing flat to keep the crushing pressure from harming it. They are, in their way, the deepest singers of all, building a picture of a pitch-black world purely out of echoes and patience. Among the shapes its echoes might find drifting in the dark is a creature straight out of old sailors' dreams. The giant squid, with eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes of any living animal, glides through the cold deep with long pale arms trailing behind it. Those enormous eyes are thought to help it catch the faintest glow of an approaching predator far off in the dark. Perhaps the soft disturbance of light stirred up in the water by a great whale diving toward it from above. For centuries, the giant squid was known only from broken fragments washed up on distant shores and from the round scars it left behind on the skin of whales, a legend far more than an animal, a creature of rumour and old fear. Then, at last, cameras lowered into the deep found it alive in its own dark home, and the long-feared myth turned out to be real after all, and far gentler and stranger than any story had ever dared to make it seem. Those enormous eyes, each one wider than a human head, are thought to be the largest of any living creature, grown so vast not to see fine detail, but to catch the very faintest glimmers in near-total darkness. Perhaps the soft sparkle of light stirred up around a great whale as it dives toward the squid through the black. An eye that wide, fully the span of a dinner plate at some 27 centimetres across, can gather the faint smear of light a diving whale stirs from more than 100 metres off, time enough to slip away into the black. For all its legendary size, the animal itself is soft and surprisingly delicate, its long arms and slender tentacles trailing behind it, gliding through the cold deep with none of the menace the old stories gave it, only a watchful patience. For all its great size, the giant squid is only very rarely seen, and the deep keeps the vast majority of its other inhabitants every bit as private. We have explored only a tiny fraction of the deep ocean in any real detail, and far less of the seafloor has been carefully mapped at high resolution than the surface of the distant moon, or even of Mars. The single greatest wilderness on our own home planet remains in large part entirely unvisited, its hidden valleys and plains and mountains charted only in the very broadest and roughest of strokes. There is something deeply restful in that thought, that so much of our own world is still simply itself, untouched and undisturbed, full of secrets it feels no need to share, waiting in the dark with endless patience, asking nothing, expecting no one, perfectly content to remain unknown for ages more. We have sent people to walk upon the moon many times over, and our machines have rolled across the red dust of Mars for years, mapping distant worlds in fine detail, and yet only a small handful of people have ever once descended to the very deepest part of our own sea, and most of the seafloor is known to us only in the broadest blur, sketched from the gentle pull of gravity rather than ever truly seen. Only a small fraction of the seafloor has been charted in any fine detail, while we hold sharp maps of the whole near face of the moon and the rust-coloured plains of Mars. The greatest unexplored place is not somewhere far out among the cold stars at all, but here, just below us, beneath the familiar surface of the water we have always known. And the mountains hidden away in that great wilderness rival anything that stands above the waves. Beneath the surface of the sea runs the longest mountain range anywhere on Earth, a single continuous chain of underwater peaks called the mid-ocean ridge, winding its way all around the entire globe for tens of thousands of kilometres, like the long seam of a great ball. It is the place where new seafloor itself is born, where the planet's vast plates slowly draw apart and fresh molten rock rises up to fill the gap, building mountains in the dark that no human eye has ever seen. The single grandest mountain range in all the world stands entirely beneath the sea, silent and lightless and unhurried, growing taller century by century, while the surface world goes busily about its bright loud days, never once suspecting the immense ranges rising in the dark far below it. This great hidden chain winds for tens of thousands of kilometres, longer by far than any range upon the land, curling down the middle of one ocean and across into the next like a single seam stitched all the way around the body of the planet. New rock wells up along it endlessly, cooling and hardening and slowly spreading outward to either side, so that the very floor of the ocean is forever being born here in the dark, a few centimetres every year, pushing the continents themselves apart over the long ages. The ridge runs for some 65,000 kilometres, longer than every range on land laid end to end, and it widens at about the rate that a fingernail grows, so slowly that a whole human life would move the seafloor only an arm's length. Scattered across the deep floor, far away from the great central ridges, stand many thousands of lonely mountains of their own. These are the seamounts, ancient underwater volcanoes that rose from the abyssal plain but never quite managed to reach the surface, lifting up out of the dark like islands that somehow forgot to break through into the air. There may be well more than 100,000 of them in all, the great majority never once explored, each single one a hidden refuge where currents swirl and gather and where life slowly collects in the dark. Around their slopes, corals and sponges and countless small creatures gather close, drawn to the rare structure in all that emptiness, so that each hidden peak becomes a small green oasis in the wide flat black. As the deep currents flow against these rising slopes, they are nudged upward, carrying nutrients toward the light and stirring the still water into a sudden richness, and so life crowds in around each seamount far more thickly than across the bare plains nearby. Each one becomes a kind of gathering place in the emptiness, a quiet island that never reached the air, ringed with living things that found it in the dark and decided to stay. The body can settle the way those creatures settle around the seamounts, finding at last a sheltered place to simply be still. Rest in that gathering stillness and let the mind sink toward where the deepest of these great landscapes plunge far beyond all the others. In a few rare places, the seafloor folds suddenly downward into immense trenches, and the very deepest of these reaches nearly 11 kilometers below the surface of the sea, in a place called the Mariana Trench. If the tallest mountain on all the land was somehow lifted up and set gently down into that gulf, its highest peak would still remain more than a mile beneath the waves, with cold, dark water above it all the way to the sky. The drop is close to 11 kilometers, nearly 7 miles straight down, deeper below the waves than a passenger jet flies above them. It is the lowest point anywhere on the surface of the earth, a long, dark, silent valley at the very bottom of the world, and yet even there, in that crushing cold, small living things quietly make their home, entirely untroubled by a weight that would fold any machine like paper. Even the deepest place is not empty. Even the very bottom of the world is alive and calm and going gently about its day. Only a very few people have ever travelled all the way down to that furthest floor, far fewer than have stood upon the highest summit of the land, and those who did described not a barren waste but a pale bottom marked here and there by the quiet tracks of living things. When the first crewed vessel finally reached the very bottom of that trench, its crew looked out through a small thick window and saw, to their wonder, a fish drifting calmly by, perfectly at home in a place they could visit only for a handful of careful minutes. At the very floor of that great trench, the pressure is almost beyond all imagining, and here lies a fact that quiets the mind with its sheer impossible scale. The weight of all the water pressing down in the deepest trenches is more than 1,000 times the pressure we feel up here at the surface, more than enough to collapse most submarines instantly, like paper cups crushed in a fist. At that depth, the water presses with the weight of more than 1,000 atmospheres, some 8 tons bearing down on every square inch, the load of a large car balanced on a single coin, and still the small things living there feel nothing of it at all. And yet, the creatures who live down there are perfectly and completely at ease, their bodies built so cleverly that the immense pressure flows right through them rather than crushing them at all, the inside and the outside held forever in an even balance. What would utterly destroy us is, to them, simply the ordinary shape of home, the only world they have ever known. There is a strange and lovely comfort in that thought, in lives so perfectly suited to their own dark world that the unbearable becomes merely unremarkable, hardly worth a moment's notice. The trick of it is that these creatures carry no large pockets of air inside them to be squeezed. They are made mostly of water and soft tissue, and water can barely be compressed at all, so the great pressure simply presses equally from every side and finds nothing to crush. Their very cells are quietly built to keep working under that weight, their delicate inner machinery tuned over countless generations so that the crushing depth becomes, to them, no burden at all but only the ordinary feel of being alive. One of those pressure-loving residents is a small, pale fish that holds a very quiet record. The snailfish has been found living deeper than almost any other fish in the world, swimming calmly through trenches several kilometres down, where the dark is total and the cold never wavers. Its body is faintly translucent, almost gelatinous, with very little hard structure inside it to be crushed, a quiet design that turns the deep's tremendous pressure into something it can simply, peacefully ignore. It drifts along the trench floor without any hurry at all, serene, the deepest dwelling fish that we have ever found, perfectly content and at home in what is, by every measure, the most extreme address anywhere on the entire planet. There seems to be a limit, somewhere a little past 8 kilometres down, beyond which no fish at all can live, a floor below the floor where the chemistry of the body can no longer quite hold itself together, and the snailfish lives right at the very edge of that boundary, as deep as a fish can be. To keep its soft tissues working under such weight, it fills itself with a special steadying substance that braces its cells from within, so much of it that the very deepest snailfish are thought to be filled nearly to their limit, propped up from the inside against the crushing dark. The deepest ever filmed was swimming more than 8 kilometres down, its faint pink body lit for a moment in a lander's beam before it slipped away, the farthest from sunlight any fish has ever been seen alive. It asked nothing of its impossible world, and its impossible world asked nothing of it. They simply suit each other, completely. Sharing those depths in spirit, if not always in the very same place, are creatures so delicate they seem to be made almost entirely of water itself. Many of the deep-sea jellyfish and their relatives are nearly transparent through and through, their bodies more than 90% water, pulsing through the dark like bells of living glass. With no hard parts at all to break and no bright colours to give them away, they pulse through the black, very nearly invisible, like ghosts of the deep gliding past on slow, muscular waves. Some of them glow faintly the moment they are touched, sending rings of pale light rippling outward along their delicate edges, so that even their alarm is somehow beautiful, a shimmer of light passing through clear water in the dark, a signal sent out softly into the endless black. Being made so largely of water is itself a quiet form of safety in the deep, for a body that is mostly water weighs almost nothing once it is in the sea, and so these creatures need no heavy bones or strong muscles to keep from sinking, hanging instead with the very smallest of efforts. There is a kind of genius in being nearly the same as the water you live in, neither rising nor falling, neither solid nor entirely formless, simply hanging in the dark like a thought given the faintest of shapes. Where those clear bells gather in their greatest numbers, they form one of the deep's most graceful and surprising sights. In the cold, dark middle waters of the open sea, jellyfish and other similar floating animals are so common that by some careful measures, they make up a great share of all the animal life floating in the entire open ocean. We so easily picture the sea as a place filled only with fish, but a truly vast portion of it is instead filled with these pulsing forms, gliding endlessly through the dark on their slow waves. The deep is, in a great many places, a jelly sea, a whole world of transparent bodies rising and falling quietly in the hush, drifting wherever the currents carry them, and the mind can rise and fall along with them, weightless and calm, holding nothing, steering nowhere, simply pulsing in the dark. Let that weightless calm carry you toward a creature whose very name alone seems to belong to a dream. The vampire squid lives in the dim, oxygen-poor waters of the Twilight Zone, but despite its dramatic and fearsome name, it is a gentle and harmless drifter, eating nothing larger than the marine snow it carefully gathers from the dark around it. When it is startled, it does not attack or flee in a panic. Instead, it turns its webbed arms up and over its whole body like a black cloak, studded all over with tiny points of light, curling into itself and glowing softly until the danger drifts away. It is, in truth, a kind of ancient relic, the last of a very old lineage that has hung peacefully through the deep for many tens of millions of years, surviving all that long time not by fighting or fleeing, but simply by quietly becoming a part of the falling dark. It lives by choice in a dim layer where there is very little oxygen at all, a band of water that most other creatures avoid, and there it moves so unhurriedly and asks so little of its own body that the thin air is more than enough, leaving it a quiet refuge with few rivals and fewer hunters. Rather than chasing anything, it drifts out two long thin filaments to gather the falling snow, then draws them in and tidies the catch into a small morsel with its arms, a careful eater in a careful life. It is no bigger than a grapefruit, its skin a deep red black, its great round eyes the largest of any animal in proportion to its body, shining a pale blue in the beam of a passing light. That ancient drifter feeds on whatever falls, and the falling itself is full of unhurried wonders. The marine snow that sinks endlessly toward the deep is woven through with the tiniest of architects, single-celled creatures that build delicate shells of glass and chalk while they live near the bright surface, and then carry those exquisite shells down with them when at last they die and begin to sink. Over truly unimaginable spans of time, their countless fallen shells pile up into thick blankets of pale white ooze across the seafloor, layer upon layer of microscopic skeletons, a deep sediment made almost entirely of life that once floated and shone in the light far above. Whole vast stretches of the deep floor are paved with these remains, a snowfield of glass and chalk too small for any eye to see, stretching away into the dark, pale and endlessly still. In the warmer, shallower parts of the deep, the floor is often a soft white made of tiny chalky shells. Deeper still, where the cold water dissolves chalk away, it shifts to the fine glassy remains of other creatures, or to a smooth red-brown clay so unhurried to gather that a layer thinner than a coin may stand for many thousands of years. To scoop up a handful of that deep ooze, if you ever could, would be to hold the fallen snow of whole geological ages, the remains of countless small lives that once floated and shone in the sunlit water far above. From those fallen shells, the deep ocean does something for the whole living planet that very often goes entirely unnoticed, and it is well worth resting against. The ocean absorbs an enormous amount of carbon out of the air above, and a great deal of it is carried down into the deep by sinking particles in the slow currents, locked safely away in the cold black for centuries on end. This quiet process, sometimes called the biological pump, is one of the great steadying forces of the whole world, the deep sea breathing in a way, what the bright surface breathes out, holding it safely far below for ages. While we go about our busy days up in the light, the dark ocean is working all the while to keep the planet's very air in balance, asking no thanks for it, making no sound, simply doing its steady work in the cold far beneath the waves. The ocean as a whole holds vastly more carbon than all the air above it, and every sinking flake of marine snow, every sinking shell, every current that carries cold water downward, takes a little more of it into the deep, where it may rest, locked away from the sky, for hundreds or even thousands of years. It is one of the great unseen machines of the living world, running endlessly and unseen, a slow breathing in of the planet that steadies everything above without ever once being noticed. The water that does this unhurried work is far older, in a very real sense, than almost anything we ever touch up on the land. A single drop of water deep in the abyss may not have seen the open sky for 1,000 years, or even longer, sliding along the bottom in the great unhurried circulation of all the seas. While the rivers race down to the ocean in a matter of days, and the clouds cross the whole sky in a matter of hours, the deep keeps a far slower and more patient clock, measuring its long journeys in centuries rather than in moments. To think of water that old, moving so very unhurriedly beneath everything that lives and rushes above, is to feel time itself stretch out and ease, the way the body eases now, more and more into the deep hush of the coming night. Within that old water swims a great shark who keeps an even slower clock all of its own. The Greenland shark is thought to be the longest living vertebrate anywhere on Earth, with some individuals carefully estimated to be many hundreds of years old, drifting through the cold deep waters of the far north at a pace so unhurried that it barely seems to move at all. It grows only a centimetre or so in an entire year, taking well more than a full century just to reach maturity, living a life so long and so calm that a single shark swimming somewhere in the dark today may already have been alive and drifting before many of our great cities were ever built. In the cold dark, hurry seems to have no meaning whatsoever, and the long, unhurried life simply continues onward, century after century, asking for nothing, drifting through the dark with the unbroken calm of something that has truly all the time in the world. A Greenland shark may not even be ready to have young of its own until it is more than 150 years old, an age at which whole human dynasties have risen and passed away, and still it has the greater part of its life ahead of it. It moves through the frigid water at the very gentlest of paces, so unhurriedly that scientists once wondered how it ever catches anything at all, and the answer, it seems, is the same as everything else about it, with patience, with stillness, with the quiet certainty of a creature for whom no moment is ever the last. The oldest of them, carefully studied, may have been swimming for close to 400 years, born into a colder world long before the first electric light, and still gliding now through the same black water at the speed of a slow walk. Slower still, in their own way, are the corals of the deep, building beauty in places no sunlight has ever once reached. Far below the bright warm reefs that we know so well down in cold dark water, other corals grow with no sun at all to feed them, drawing their nourishment instead from the tiny particles streaming past them in the current. These deep water reefs can be many thousands of years old, vast and intricate structures of stone and living tissue rising from the dark floor, sheltering countless other creatures within their delicate branches. They build no less wonder than their bright sunlit cousins far above, only far more slowly and entirely in secret, raising delicate gardens of pale calcium in the cold black, where no one will ever once come to admire them. Some of these cold water reefs stretch for many kilometres along the deep slopes and ridges, ancient living mounds built up grain by grain over tens of thousands of years, sheltering whole crowds of fish and crabs and brittle stars within their pale branching thickets. They feed not on sunlight but on the steady rain of marine snow and the small creatures the currents bring them, proving that a reef, that bright symbol of warm sunlit seas, can also be a thing of the cold and the dark, growing where no swimmer will ever come down to see it. There is beauty here that asks for no witness, that simply grows in the dark because growing is what life everywhere does. Drifting up from those secret gardens, let the breath settle into a lower and easier rhythm, and consider for a moment a small creature whose whole face seems lit faintly from within. The hatchet fish, a small silvery dweller of the twilight zone, has a body so thin and so mirror-bright that it very nearly disappears entirely when seen edge-on, and along its belly run rows of soft little lights that erase its own shadow from below. Its great upturned eyes search the dim water overhead constantly for the falling silhouettes of food, and its slim, flattened form catches and scatters the faint blue light so completely that it seems to flicker quietly out of existence and back again. It is a living sliver of mirror and lamp suspended in the dusk of the sea, here and then not here and then gone again, as elusive and as fleeting as a thought slipping away in the last moment just before sleep. Most hatchet fish are no longer than a thumb, their flanks plated in living silver that throws back the dim blue light like a tilted mirror, so that from the side they all but vanish into the water around them. That same dusky middle water holds a slender fish that wears its very hunger as a kind of lantern. The dragonfish, dark and long and thin, carries a glowing lure dangling beneath its chin on a delicate barbel, and in some species it can also produce a deep red light that almost no other creature anywhere in the sea is able to see at all. Because nearly all of the deep-sea animals are completely blind to the colour red, the dragonfish can quietly shine a secret beam of it, lighting up its unsuspecting prey in a colour that is utterly invisible to them, hunting calmly with a private light in a whole world tuned only to blue. To make its own eyes able to see the red light it produces, The dragonfish carries a special inner pigment, a quiet adjustment that lets it perceive what no other creature around it can, so that its private beam falls only on its own waiting gaze. It is a quiet trick of pure physics turned to the work of survival, a flashlight that only its owner can ever perceive, glowing there in the dark like a small secret kept close and warm by the deep itself, shared with no one. Even colour itself behaves strangely down in the deep, and this small fact carries its own kind of wonder. Red is the very first colour to vanish as you descend into the water, absorbed and lost within the first few meters, which is exactly why so very many of the deep-sea creatures are themselves coloured red, or scarlet, or deep crimson. In the blue-black depths, where no red light ever manages to reach, a red body simply appears entirely black, perfectly and effortlessly hidden in plain open sight. A bright red shrimp that would blaze like a glowing coal up in the sunlight becomes nothing more than a drifting shadow, down in the deep, invisible to very nearly every eye that passes. The very colours that would make a creature blaze with brightness up above become, far below, a perfect cloak of darkness, beauty and disguise quietly folded together into one and the same hue. This is why so much of the life of the deep, brought suddenly up into the light, turns out to be dressed in deep reds and oranges and rich rosy pinks, colours that seem far too bright and cheerful for so dark a place, until you remember that down where they live, those very colours simply melt away into the surrounding black. A deep-sea creature painted scarlet is, in its own world, wearing the most perfect of camouflage, hiding in plain view by being coloured in a light that never reaches it. In that cloaking dark, some hunters carry eyes that seem to glow with a quiet inner light all their own. Certain deep-sea fish have a special mirror-like layer set just behind the retina that catches every last scrap of available light and reflects it back through the eye a second time, the very same trick that makes a cat's eyes shine in the beam of a flashlight at night. Down in the deep, this clever design means that an eye can use a single dim spark of light twice over, doubling its slim chance of seeing in a world that offers almost nothing at all to be seen by. It is a small miracle of natural engineering, grown patiently over countless ages, a quiet way of wringing precious vision from the very thin edge of total darkness, and the listening mind too may feel its own eyes growing heavy now, content at last to simply let all the seeing go. Let the eyes rest fully now, and let the mind float toward a creature that seems to have stepped quietly out of some very old fairy tale. The frilled shark, a slender eel-like fish that has changed remarkably little across an enormous span of time, moves through the deep with a mouth full of strange three-pronged teeth and a body so ancient in its design that it is very often called a living fossil. It lives far down in the cold dark, only rarely ever seen by anyone, moving patiently through the water with the unhurried, easy grace of something that has quietly outlasted whole ages of the earth itself. To look upon it, even in a photograph, is to catch a brief glimpse of a shape out of the deep and distant past, still swimming gently along in the present moment, a calm survivor of times so old they lie almost entirely beyond our counting, untroubled by all the long years it has drifted through. Its long, slender, eel-like body lets it move through the water with a slow, snake-like grace, and its many small hooked teeth are arranged in rows that gleam faintly pale against the dark of its open mouth, looking less fearsome than strange, like something half-remembered from an old dream. So little has changed in its kind across the long ages that to study it is almost to study the deep itself, as it was before our world took on its present shape, a living window onto a sea far older than any memory. Survival down in the deep so often means making the very most of a single, well-timed chance, and few creatures anywhere do this more strangely than one small lonely fish. In some species of the deep-sea anglerfish, the tiny male is so very much smaller than the female that, when he at last manages to find her somewhere out in all that vast dark, he simply bites onto her body and never once lets go again, slowly fusing himself into her until he becomes a small, permanent part of her, sharing her very blood and her life from then on. In a world so empty and so wide that two of a single kind may almost never meet at all in a lifetime, this is a quiet way of making absolutely sure that one meeting once found is enough to last forever. It is strange, yes, undeniably strange, but it is also a kind of gentle solving of loneliness, two separate lives becoming one so that life itself can carry on softly in the dark. In that same vast and patient emptiness, the deep solves the old puzzle of finding a mate in many other ways as well. Because the open ocean depths are so very sparsely populated, with great empty distances between one life and the next, many of the creatures there rely on light and on scent to find one another across all that darkness, blinking out soft signals or releasing the faintest of chemical trails into the slow current. A single flash given in just the right particular rhythm, a faint trace of something achingly familiar carried downstream, and across all of that vast darkness two separate lives somehow manage to find and reach each other. It is a quiet kind of romance, written entirely in soft glimmers and faint traces, a patient proof that even in the very loneliest country anywhere on Earth, connection still somehow finds its own slow and certain way through the dark. Sometimes the connection that is found is between two entirely different kinds of life, joined together for the simple sake of survival. All across the great dark, deep, quiet partnerships bloom. Bacteria living deep inside the bodies of worms and fish, lighting their lures and feeding them from within. Small creatures sheltering safely among the protective spines of much larger ones. Whole gardens of varied life clustered close around a single warm vent or a single fallen whale. In a place where very nearly everything is scarce, cooperation is not some rare luxury, but simply a fundamental way of being, and the deep is woven through top to bottom with these quiet living alliances. The body can lean into that warm idea, the idea of being held and supported, of not ever having to do everything entirely alone, of resting within something larger, and let the slow breath grow soft and easy with it. Soften a little further now, and let the imagination sink toward a creature so simple and so strange that it gently blurs the very line between an animal and the water itself. Comb jellies, delicate and clear and nearly weightless, row through the deep by beating long lines of tiny hair-like paddles that scatter the very faintest light into shimmering rainbows running along their sides. They are not true jellyfish at all, but something even older, among the most ancient branches of all animal life, and they move not by stinging or by chasing anything, but simply by gently rowing themselves through the water with many thousands of microscopic oars. As they pass by, those beating rows catch what little light there is and quietly split it into running bands of colour, so that even in the deep dark a single comb jelly leaves behind a faint trail of moving rainbow, a small bit of beauty passing softly through the endless black. The moving rainbow is not a glow of its own, but only the dim light bending through the beating combs, 1,000 tiny oars catching and splitting what little brightness there is into bands of green and gold and rose. Where those clear drifters gather in their greatest numbers, the deep reveals just how richly its empty-seeming spaces are truly filled with life. Scientists who carefully lower their nets and their cameras down into the depths almost always find creatures entirely new to science, species never before named, forms never once described, hiding all this time in water that no one had ever thought to sample before. By some careful estimates, the great majority of all the many species living in the deep ocean have not yet been discovered by us at all. An entire vast hidden catalogue of unnamed life simply waiting, unhurried, in the dark. Every single expedition is its own small unveiling, and yet for all of them the dark still holds far, far more than it has ever once shown us. The wonder of the deep is not running out. In truth, it has only barely begun to be glimpsed. Some of what waits patiently down there is almost too delicate ever to bring up into the light. Certain deep-sea creatures are so very soft and so finely built for their own particular world of crushing pressure that they simply fall quietly apart when carried up toward the surface, dissolving away in the unfamiliar warmth and the strange lightness of our bright upper world. To truly know them at all, we must instead go to visit them right where they live, patiently, with cameras and careful instruments, rather than ever pulling them up into a world that would only unmake them. There is a deep humility waiting in that thought, a quiet reminder that some of the world's wonders can only ever be met fully on their own terms, in their own dark and faraway home, and never once owned or kept. Some beautiful things are meant only to be witnessed for a moment and then left entirely in peace. Leave them all in peace then, and let your drifting attention turn toward one of the very strangest fish ever to swim quietly into the light of a camera. The fangtooth, a small dark hunter of the deep, has teeth so impossibly long for its tiny little body that they cannot ever fully fit inside its closed mouth, sliding instead into special protective sockets set near its eyes whenever it shuts its jaws. Despite this rather fearsome and dramatic design, the fangtooth is only a few small centimetres long in all, a little creature wearing an outsized grin, hunting patiently through the cold dark in search of whatever small thing happens to drift its way. It is a gentle reminder that down in the deep, fierceness and smallness so very often live together in the very same little body, and that what at first looks for all the world like a monster is, almost always, just a tiny stubborn life doing its quiet best to simply survive. The deep is full to the brim with these quiet contradictions, and here is yet another to rest against. Despite all the cold and all the dark and all the crushing weight, the deep ocean is, in truth, one of the very most stable environments anywhere on the entire planet. While the bright surface world swings constantly through heat and cold, through wild storm and dead calm, through bright day and dark night, the deep below holds perfectly steady, its temperature, its darkness, and its profound hush barely changing at all across the long ages. For all the creatures who make their homes there, the world is simply a place of profound and lasting constancy, a deep stillness so reliable and so unbroken that it has slowly shaped every single part of how they live. There is something in that great steadiness that the tired and busy mind quietly recognizes and reaches toward, a deep calm stillness it would dearly love to borrow just for this one night. That borrowed stillness has a sound all its own, or rather, it has a soft and near absence of sound down in the depths. Far below the constant noise of the breaking waves and the rushing restless wind up above, the deep ocean is extraordinarily beautifully quiet, a vast hushed space where the very loudest things are only the faint distant clicks of unseen creatures and the unhurried movement of the water itself. Sound travels far down here, it is true, but there is so very little of it ever made that the silence itself begins to feel almost solid, a thick and welcoming stillness pressing inward from every single side at once. To hang in that great quiet would be to feel the whole world finally go truly and completely silent, every last distraction dissolved away, nothing left at all but the slow pulse of the deep and the slow, easy pulse of your own resting breath. Within that deep and welcoming hush moves a creature whose very body is a quiet marvel of cold water engineering. Some deep-sea fish carry special antifreeze proteins flowing right in their blood, clever little molecules that gently stop ice crystals from ever forming, allowing the fish to swim along entirely untroubled in water, cold enough to freeze any creature that lacked such protection. Down in the chill, near-freezing depths, and in the icy seas near the distant poles, these fish glide calmly along as though the bitter cold were truly nothing at all, their own inner chemistry quietly and constantly holding the creeping frost at bay. It is a kind of warmth that owes absolutely nothing to heat, a way of being perfectly comfortable in a deep cold that would still any other heart in moments, and it quietly allows a whole flourishing world of life to thrive in places where the freezing alone might once have seemed to forbid it entirely. Where that great cold meets the deep floor in certain rare and special places, the sea offers up yet another surprising marvel. In a very few scattered spots, dense salty water collects in low pockets down on the sea floor, so very much heavier than the ordinary water all around it that it pools and gathers into actual lakes and even rivers beneath the surface of the sea, complete with their own shorelines and their own little waves. These brine pools shimmer in the beam of a passing submersible's light, looking for all the world like ponds resting at the very bottom of the ocean, their strange surfaces rippling, their dark edges fringed with unfamiliar mussels and white crabs. A whole lake within the sea, a real shore beneath the rolling waves, the deep folding water upon water in ways that feel almost entirely impossible. And yet there they truly lie, motionless and shimmering in the dark. The brine within them is so salty and so heavy that ordinary seawater simply floats on top of it and will not mix, leaving a clear and trembling surface between the two. A true shoreline at the bottom of the sea where one can watch the exact line where pool meets ocean. A small submersible passing low over one of these pools can even send ripples chasing across its surface, exactly as a breath of wind would ripple a pond on land, a strange and lovely echo of the surface world hidden far down in the dark. Around the edges of those hidden impossible pools, life gathers close in pale gardens. Mussels and tube worms and ghostly little shrimp cluster all along the shores of the brine, feeding on the chemicals that seep up from far below, thriving in a place that should, by every ordinary expectation, be entirely barren and dead. Here, right at the strange meeting of poison and pressure and bitter cold, the deep grows life anyway, crowded and abundant, lining the impossible lakes with their own communities of gathered creatures. It is the deep's gentle insistence, repeated everywhere you care to look. Wherever there is even the very smallest chance for life to take hold, life will somehow find a way to settle in and stay. And as you listen, you may feel your own breathing settle along with it now, easy and unforced, finding at last its own shore to rest upon. Rest at that shore a while, and let the mind wander toward a creature shaped almost entirely by patience itself. The deep-sea cucumber, a long pink or violet sack of an animal no firmer than wet velvet, crawls its way along the abyssal floor on rows of tiny tube feet, sweeping up the fine, pale snow that has settled there, turning the fallen remains of the upper sea into both food and fresh new sediment. In some parts of the deep, these animals make up the great majority of all the living mass on the entire sea floor, a vast herd forever tending the bottom of the whole world. They are the gardeners of the abyss, asking absolutely nothing of anyone, hurrying off to nowhere at all, simply moving through the dark at a hand's breadth an hour, and making the floor anew beneath them, day after day, age after age, asking only to continue. As they feed, they sift the mud and pass it back out behind them, cleaned and turned, so that over the long ages these creatures work the entire floor of the deep, much as earthworms turn a garden soil, keeping it loose and living rather than letting it lie packed and dead. Some of them, when the food is good, lift just above the bottom in unhurried crowds, their pale translucent bodies rising and settling like leaves on a windless day, moving wherever the faintest currents care to take them. Sharing that same dark floor with them are creatures whose long thin arms search through the black like living rivers. Brittle stars, the close cousins of the sea star but with long thin flexible arms, gather down on the deep floor in truly enormous numbers, sometimes carpeting whole vast stretches of seabed so thickly that they seem to ripple and shift like a single great living surface. They reach their delicate arms out into the passing current to catch the falling food, their many slender limbs waving in the steady flow, countless tiny separate lives all moving together as one in the dark. Seen from somewhere far above, such a great gathering looks for all the world like a wide field stirred by an invisible wind, a vast living meadow of waving arms, alive and endlessly patient down on the floor of the very deepest sea. Each slender arm is jointed like a fine string of tiny beads, able to bend and curl in any direction, and should one ever be lost, the creature can simply grow it back again, over time. In some places they gather so densely that there seem to be more of them than there is floor to hold them, arm overlapping arm in a single trembling carpet, each one reaching into the current for whatever scrap of food the water happens to carry past. Above those waving meadows, out in the open water, drifts a creature that has often been called the very most beautiful animal of all the deep. Some of the deep-sea jellyfish glow not in flat plain blue at all, but in shifting reds and deep violets, their delicate bells lit warmly from somewhere deep within, trailing long fine tendrils behind them that ripple with light as they pulse through the dark. One famous deep-dwelling jelly flashes patterns of crimson light all along the length of its body, a silent fireworks display unfolding in the lightless deep, performed for no audience at all but the dark itself. Some of these jellies, when disturbed, send a wave of light spinning round and round the rim of their bells, a turning pinwheel of glow in the black, while others release a glittering cloud of sparks into the water and slip away behind it. The colours are thought to serve as warnings, or as lures, or perhaps even as a cry for help, a flash so bright it might draw a larger hunter to chase off the one giving trouble. But whatever their purpose, to our eyes they are simply, quietly beautiful. To watch one drift past would be to feel deep down that beauty needs no witness at all in order to exist, that the deep makes its wonders simply because that is what life everywhere does, glowing whether or not a single soul is ever there to see it. That same indifference to any witness shapes the lives of even the very smallest of the deep's builders. Tiny single-celled creatures called foraminifera float and crawl throughout the deep, building exquisite shells of pale chalk in spiralling many-chambered shapes, each one a microscopic work of fine architecture far too small ever to be seen by the unaided eye. When at last they die, their tiny shells settle to the floor and become part of the gathering sediment, and over truly vast ages those countless fallen shells can pile up into great deep deposits, and even, in time, into solid stone. Some of the very rock that would much later rise up into bright cliffs and rolling green hills was first made right here, grain by grain, in the dark hush of the sea. The famous white cliffs that stand pale and bright above some northern shores are made almost entirely of these tiny shells, countless trillions of them, gathered on an ancient seafloor and then lifted, over unimaginable ages, into the open air and the sunlight. To run a hand along such a cliff, chalk powdering cool and dry against the fingertips, is to touch the long-fallen snow of a vanished sea, raised at last into daylight after resting in the dark for longer than the mind can hold. There is a long, slow making in that, the way whole mountains begin as nothing more than tiny motes of dust settling on the floor of the night sea. Let that idea of slow building carry you downward now, the whole body growing calmer and easier with each turn of the unhurried current. Deep beneath the abyssal floor itself, far below even the very deepest creatures we usually take the time to picture, scientists have somehow found living things dwelling right inside the solid rock, tiny microbes living in the smallest spaces of the sediment and the crust, kilometers down below the seabed. This entire hidden world, sometimes called the deep biosphere, may in truth hold a genuinely staggering portion of all the living cells anywhere on Earth, life packed into the very stone in total darkness, surviving on only the very faintest trickle of chemical energy seeping through the rock. When scientists drill deep into the seafloor and study the rock that comes up, they find it alive with these tiny cells, kilometers below the bottom, in pressures and temperatures that once seemed certain to forbid all life, and the count of them is so vast that, taken together, this buried world may rival all the life of the sunlit surface combined. Even the solid floor of the deep, it turns out, is not lifeless at all but richly inhabited, a buried wilderness alive far beneath our feet, enduring on and on with a patience that lies almost entirely beyond all imagining. Those buried hidden lives move along at a pace so slow that it makes even the patient corals seem positively hurried by comparison. Some of the microbes living deep within the seafloor are thought to divide and reproduce only once in every 100 years, or even less often still than that, surviving for spans of time so vast that they begin to blur softly into the truly geological. A single tiny cell down there might quietly live on for many thousands of years, slowly sipping the very smallest crumbs of available energy, dividing only on a timescale that we can barely even begin to conceive of. To them, a whole human lifetime would pass by in less than the space of a single heartbeat. There is a strange and lasting peace in simply imagining life that unhurried, life that does nothing at all but quietly persist on in the dark, entirely untroubled by the passage of time, perfectly content merely to continue being. Back up in the open water once more, the deep keeps spinning out its softer marvels for anyone with the patience to receive them. Certain deep-sea octopuses have been found brooding over their eggs for years on end without ever leaving, the very longest known parental care of any animal anywhere. A single mother clinging to her clutch on a cold rock ledge month after month, year after year, never once departing, fading away herself as her young develop within their eggs. One such mother was watched as she guarded her eggs for more than 4 full years, the very longest such devoted vigil ever once recorded, an unbroken act of pure devotion in the lightless deep. In the steady cold, where everything happens slowly, even the growing of the young within their eggs takes an age, and the mother simply waits it out, fanning fresh water over them, brushing away the silt, never leaving even to feed, growing pale and thin in the dark. By the time the tiny young finally emerge, fully formed and ready for the deep, she has given them everything she had to give, and her long watch, the longest in all the animal world, comes at last to its end. There is something deeply, achingly tender in that single image, a lone creature keeping faithful watch in the dark for years on end, asking nothing at all for herself, giving up absolutely everything she has, until at long last the young swim free into the sea. When at last those young finally hatch and the long watch is over, they swim out into a world where even the most familiar of shapes can surprise you. Some of the deep-sea creatures are so completely transparent that you can see their inner organs clearly right through their skin, their small hearts and stomachs faintly glowing or pulsing away within bodies as clear and as colourless as the water itself. A few of them even have entirely see-through heads, or windows set right into their flesh, hiding nothing at all from anyone, moving through the dark as living glass. For a creature of the deep, being clear is one of the very finest ways to hide, for there are no shadows here to lurk in, and no corners to slip behind. A transparent body simply lets the faint light pass straight through it, casting almost no silhouette at all, present and yet very nearly not there. Some keep only their eyes and a few inner parts dark, the rest of them clear as the water, so that a passing hunter sees little more than a tiny floating speck where a whole living creature hangs. To ever meet one would be to look not at a surface at all but straight on into a living life, every inner working laid open in the passing light of a submersible's beam, beautiful and entirely unguarded down in the deep. Among those clear drifting lives is a small octopus that has mastered the art of stillness itself. The deep-sea octopus can change not only its colour but the very texture of its skin, raising small bumps and ridges to match the seafloor beneath it, then smoothing itself flat and even once again, blending so completely into the surrounding dark that it seems to simply vanish into the very bottom of the sea. In a world that holds so very little light, this is less about hiding from any watching eye than it is about becoming a part of the stillness itself, dissolving into the deep peace of the floor. You can do the very same thing now, smoothing out all your own ridges, letting your sharp colours go dim and dark, easing down into the hush of the bed beneath you, becoming part of the stillness. Settle there into the stillness, and let the imagination wander toward a creature whose very shape seems somehow carved from a dream of pure glass. Glass sponges build up their delicate bodies entirely from fine spires of silica, weaving intricate lattices of natural living glass so very fine and yet so surprisingly strong that engineers now study them in order to learn how to build better and stronger structures of our own. Some of these sponges live on for many long centuries, growing only the width of a hair in a year in the cold dark, their bodies like frozen fountains, like spun crystal, like tiny silent cathedrals raised up by countless hands far too small ever to see. They stand upon the deep floor, glowing faintly in any passing light, a reminder that the deep is not only a place of bare survival, but also, just as truly, a place of astonishing craft and care. The fine glass threads these sponges grow are so clear and so well made that light can travel right along them, much as it travels down the slender fibres we use to carry messages across the world, and engineers have studied them closely to learn how nature spins such flawless glass in cold water, without heat, without fire, without effort. Each sponge is a tower of countless such threads, woven into a lattice strong enough to stand for centuries against the currents, beautiful and useful at once, a masterpiece grown in the dark by a creature with no hands and no plan but the deep wisdom of its kind. A single glass sponge may stand for more than 10,000 years, among the longest-lived animals known, its woven spires holding their shape unbroken through 100 human centuries of cold and dark and silence. Inside some of those glass cathedrals lives one of the deep's very most touching small stories. A particular kind of glass sponge will very often quietly shelter a single pair of tiny shrimp deep within it, one male and one female, who first swim inside it together while they are still young, and then slowly grow far too large ever to leave again, spending the whole of their entire lives together, content within the sponge's fine glass lattice. In some cultures, these very sponges, with their lifelong devoted captive pair held gently inside, have long been given as treasured wedding gifts, a quiet living symbol of two separate lives bound softly and faithfully together until the very end of their days. A home, a partner, a whole long-shared life lived peacefully inside a structure of living glass down in the dark of the deep, and never once, it seems, a single wish to be anywhere else at all. The two enter as tiny swimming young, slipping easily in through the fine gaps in the sponge's glass weave, and there they feed on the small particles the sponge draws in, kept safe within its lattice from anything that might harm them. As they grow, they become too large ever to leave again, and so they remain, the two of them together, sheltered and fed and bound for life within the same clear walls, until in time their own tiny young drift out through the gaps to seek sponges and partners of their own. The deep keeps gently offering up these soft images of belonging, of somehow finding exactly the right quiet place, and then simply staying there in peace. Many of the deep-sea creatures never once leave the small patch of dark that they are first born into, living out the whole of their entire lives within a tiny familiar range, coming to know one single quiet corner of the vast abyss with a deep completeness that we can scarcely even imagine. There is no restlessness at all in them, no nagging urge to wander off elsewhere, only a deep settledness, a quiet and total being at home so complete that all the rest of the immense ocean simply does not ever call to them. The tired and restless mind can lean toward that feeling now, the deep feeling of being exactly where you truly belong, with nowhere else at all to go and nothing else to seek, only this one quiet place and this one gentle hour. Quiet as it always is, the deep is nonetheless forever in slow motion far below the reach of any surface storm. Deep ocean currents move along with a slowness almost entirely beyond our perception, drifting along the dark bottom at only the very smallest fraction of a walking pace, taking many long years just to cross a single wide sea. These slow currents carry cold and nutrients and countless tiny floating lives along across the whole dark floor of the world, a circulation so very unhurried and yet so steady and unbroken that it feels less like the flowing of water at all than like the deep, slow breathing of the entire living planet itself. Nothing here ever hurries, and yet nothing here ever truly stops either. The great unhurried movement simply continues quietly on, steady and unbroken, beneath everything that rushes and frets and hurries far above it. Carried along on that flow are creatures whose whole existence is a surrender to the current. Vast clouds of tiny animals, the zooplankton of the deep, do not so much actively swim as simply float, rising and sinking with the rhythms of the surrounding water, going wherever the current happens to take them. They are the very gentlest of all travellers, asking nothing at all, steering nowhere in particular, simply trusting the water to carry them along through the dark. And in that trust there is a kind of deep wisdom that the busy surface so easily forgets. The old wisdom of letting go entirely, of being held and moved without any struggle at all, of resting completely within something far larger and far slower than oneself. They make no choice and set no course, and the water carries them anyway, rising and falling on its own through the dark, exactly as the breath rises and falls without your asking it to. Let the easy breath carry you toward one of the strangest recyclers anywhere in the deep. When wood from fallen trees somehow finds its slow way down to the seafloor, swept far out to sea by rivers and storms and then sinking slowly all the way down, special deep-sea clams and worms gather to feed upon it, patiently breaking the hard wood down with the quiet help of bacteria, turning even a single sunken branch into a small living island of gathered life. A single piece of waterlogged driftwood resting on the deep floor can quietly support its own little community for many years, a small patient colony of creatures gathered close around the unexpected gift fallen from the distant land. The deep, it seems, wastes truly nothing at all. It patiently finds a use and a quiet home in absolutely everything that falls to it, even a small forgotten fragment of forest carried far away from any shore. That very same generosity shapes the deep's response to the bones that come to settle upon it. After a whalefall has fed the swift scavengers and then the bone-eaters, after long years of steady feasting in the dark, the remaining bones can still go on nourishing life for a very long time more, releasing their stored oils little by little into the surrounding sediment. Strange specialized worms with no mouth at all and no gut to speak of, their feathery red plumes, the only bright thing for miles, bore into the bones and draw out their hidden fat with the help of bacteria, mining a thin sustenance from an old skeleton resting on the black floor of the sea. A single death feeds a long and unbroken chain of separate lives, each one handing the gift onto the next in turn, so that even the bare bones become, in time, a slow harvest down in the dark. That long quiet chain reaches all the way back up toward the distant light, gently binding the whole ocean, top to bottom, into one single connected thing. The deep sea and the bright sunlit surface are not in truth two separate worlds at all, but only the two far ends of one single great living system, joined forever together by the marine snow that endlessly falls, by the small creatures that rise and sink again each night, by the slow currents that climb and dive. Whatever happens up at the surface reaches the depths below in its own slow time, and whatever the depths quietly hold rises gently up again, at last, to feed the surface once more. The ocean is one single connected breath, all the way from top to bottom, and the deep is its long, slow exhale, faithfully holding what the surface gives and then returning it, ages and ages later, gently transformed. Rest now in that quiet wholeness, a small part of one single great connected calm. Within that great quiet wholeness, the deep faithfully guards relics of an earth long since vanished from the world above. The cold, dark, unhurried waters preserve ancient forms of life that have changed only very little, across truly enormous spans of slow time. Creatures whose distant ancestors swam these very same depths, back when the continents themselves wore entirely different shapes, and the bright surface world above would be utterly unrecognizable to us now. To ever find such a creature still living is to look directly upon a quiet survivor of deep time itself, a single living thread reaching back patiently through hundreds of millions of years, still moving along calmly and gently in the present moment. The deep is, in a sense, a kind of vast museum that does not even know that it is a museum, faithfully keeping its most ancient residents not behind cold glass at all, but simply alive and well, swimming gently along through the very same dark that all their distant forebears once knew. Among those ancient survivors is one particular fish that the whole world once firmly believed had been long extinct. The coelacanth, a heavy, steel-blue, lobe-finned fish nearly 2 meters long, was thought to have vanished entirely from the face of the earth untold ages ago, and then was found one day still very much alive in deep water, swimming along calmly as though no time at all had ever passed. Its sudden discovery utterly stunned the scientists who had only ever known it before from faint impressions pressed in ancient stone, a living creature stepping out of the deep distant past and straight into the startled present. It lives in cool, dark waters far down below, moving without haste, a true living link to a chapter of life so old it lies almost beyond all imagining, proof that the deep can hide away even the very things we feel most certain are forever gone. Its stout, fleshy fins move in a slow, alternating rhythm, almost as a four-legged animal walks, a faint echo of the very kinds of creatures from which the first walkers on land are thought to have long ago descended, so that in its swimming one can almost glimpse a distant chapter of our own deep story. It had been known only from stone for so long that its sudden reappearance, alive in the modern sea, felt to those who found it like a small miracle, a door opening onto a past everyone believed had closed forever. Something long thought lost, found again. Found, too, down in the deep, are the largest gatherings of life that follow no map at all that we have yet managed to draw. In certain seasons and in certain particular places, the creatures of the deep gather together in great congregations, slowly drawn into one place by the currents and the food and the soft signals of the dark, forming crowds whose comings and goings we're still only just beginning to truly understand. Squid gather together to spawn, fish gather together to feed, and vast silent schools move slowly through the depths in patterns far older than any memory, gently guided by cues that we cannot yet even read. There is so very much that the deep still quietly does in private, on its own unhurried schedule, entirely indifferent to whether or not we ever come to learn its hidden reasons. And there is a deep rest waiting in that thought too, in a whole world that simply keeps its own quiet rhythms whether or not anyone at all is ever there watching. The deep keeps its own rhythms in light just as faithfully as it keeps them in motion, and here is a tender thought to settle into. Most of the light down in the deep ocean is some shade of blue, both because blue travels the very farthest through water, and because the creatures that glow there tend to glow in cool blues and greens, the precise colours that their neighbours can most easily see. A red glow would be almost entirely wasted in a world of blue-tuned eyes, and so the living lights of the deep have settled over countless ages into only the coolest of hues, a palette of blues and greens forever flickering through the dark. The deep is lit, wherever it is lit at all, in only the very gentlest of all colours, the colours of evening and of clear still water, the very colours that the tired resting eye finds easiest of all to love, because blue is the one colour that reaches deepest before the water swallows it. The eyes of most deep creatures have, over the long ages, become finely tuned to blue above all else, seeing it clearly while the warmer colours fade to nothing, and so the living lights and the watching eyes have settled together upon the very same hue. It is as though the whole deep agreed, long ago, to speak in a single colour, the calm blue-green of the last light, and to let all the rest go. Those living lights serve 100 different purposes down in the dark, and one of the most beautiful of them is simply to speak. In the silent black, where calling out aloud with sound is not always quite possible or safe, many of the creatures speak to one another instead in flashes of light, in patterns of blue-green glow that signal a warning, an invitation, a recognition between two of a single kind. One particular rhythm of blinking might say, "I am here," or it might say, "Stay safely away," or it might say, "Come a little closer now," a whole language written out entirely in pulses of light against the endless black. The deep, for all its great and lasting silence, is in truth full of conversation, a flickering dialogue forever passing between the floating lives, faint and steady as the blinking of the most distant stars. Some of those conversations happen, surprisingly, between creatures that we would never once expect to glow at all. Even certain of the deep-sea sharks produce a faint blue-green light of their own along their pale bellies, shining there either to hide their dark silhouettes from anything watching below, or perhaps simply to recognize one another in all the surrounding black. One small, deep-water shark, no longer than a forearm, is in fact among the very largest known luminous animals anywhere, gliding silently through the depths, with a thin glow tracing out the very edges of its whole body. To picture a shark not as a frightening dark shape at all, but instead as a shining one, sliding through the deep like a slow-swimming lantern, is to feel just how thoroughly the deep has turned even its own hunters into bearers of welcome light. The glow comes from countless pinpoint organs scattered across the underside, and it is thought to serve the same purpose as it does for so many others here, erasing the shadow against the faint light from above so that nothing below ever sees the shark coming, while perhaps also letting these animals know their own kind by the pattern of their shining. Even the hunter, in the deep, must learn to glow in order to disappear. Still light, still motion, still time, and now a great vastness wide enough to hold them all. If you could somehow gather and pour every single drop of the deep ocean into one great single measure, it would utterly dwarf every lake and river and shallow sunlit sea in all the world combined, holding the overwhelming majority of all the water there is on Earth within its cold, dark volume. Very nearly all of the living space there is, very nearly all of the water there is, very nearly all of the room there is anywhere at all lies right here, below the bright surface, down in the dark. We live our whole lives upon only the very thin, bright edge of a world that is, in its deepest truth, mostly deep ocean, mostly cold, mostly black, and mostly endlessly still. And there is a real and lasting comfort in being only a small part of something so vast and so deeply calm, a single, small listener resting at the edge of an enormous and welcoming dark. Settle a little deeper now into that great vastness, and let the breath grow slow and wonderfully even, for the deep holds far more wonders than any single night could ever hope to gather and hold. Far down, where the water is utterly and completely black, some of the creatures have given up their eyes entirely, navigating their whole world instead by touch, and by taste, and by the very faint stirrings of the water itself against their skin. With no light ever at all to see by, sight became only a cost without any reward, and so these animals simply let it go, growing instead exquisitely sensitive to absolutely everything else, learning to read the whole of the dark through every other sense they have. There is no real loss at all in it, only a wholly different way of knowing the world, an easy way of moving through perfect darkness with perfect, unhurried ease. Many of them grow long, delicate feelers and fine, sensitive hairs in place of eyes, reading the faint pressure of the water as it moves, tasting the trace of a meal upon the current, feeling the small stir left behind by anything that passes near, so that the dark around them is rich with information we could never sense at all. To them, the blackness is not empty or frightening, but simply full, a whole world known by touch and taste and the language of moving water, every bit as detailed and alive as the bright seen world is to us, every faint current a sentence, every passing stir a name. With your own eyes already closed in the dark, you are nearer to them now than to anything in the lit world above. In that perfect and welcoming darkness hangs a fish whose strange upturned head holds a curious advantage. Some of the deep-sea fish have upward-facing eyes and a particular body shape that lets them hold very nearly motionless in the still water, watching the dim space far above for the faint passing silhouette of anything at all that crosses between them and the very last of the failing light. They simply wait there without ever moving, patient as the stones, ready to rise the very instant a shadow finally slides overhead, spending almost no energy at all as they hover there in the dark. It is a whole way of hunting that is mostly stillness, mostly waiting, mostly the quiet art of doing nothing at all until the one right moment. And patience, the whole deep seems to whisper to anyone who listens, is its own kind of grace. Grace of yet another kind belongs to those many creatures that have somehow turned the simple act of hanging in the water into a true art form. Some of the deep-sea animals have bodies so perfectly balanced against the surrounding sea that they neither rise nor sink at all, suspended in the dark with absolutely no effort whatsoever, held exactly in place by only the simplest of physics. They have made themselves weightless, in a sense, fine-tuning their own flesh and inner fluids over the ages until the sea now holds them effortlessly exactly where they most wish to be. To ever hang like that, neither falling away below nor climbing up above, perfectly poised within the hush, is a kind of complete rest that the busy body very rarely ever truly knows, and you may feel just the faintest hint of it now, held by the bed beneath you, neither rising nor sinking at all, suspended weightless in the stillness of the hour. Some manage this by storing light oils or fats within their bodies, or by letting their flesh grow watery and loose, until their whole weight matches the water around them so exactly that they hold their place without a single beat of a fin. They neither work to stay up nor struggle against sinking. They have simply made peace, body and sea, until the holding requires nothing at all, and stillness becomes the most natural thing there is. Suspended there in that stillness, the deep keeps a steady accounting of the entire long history of the planet. The many layers of fine sediment on the deep floor are something very like the pages of an enormous book, each thin band of it a faithful record of a whole age, holding the dust and volcanic ash and tiny fallen shells of times long since past. By drawing up long cores of this sediment, scientists can read backward through many millions of years, learning how the ancient climate shifted, how whole forms of life rose and fell, how the entire world became the world that it is now. The deep faithfully remembers absolutely everything, layer upon layer, keeping the whole long story of the planet undisturbed in the cold dark, an archive that no flood or fire from above could ever once reach to harm. A single core of mud, no thicker than an arm and the dull green-grey of wet ash, can hold within it a record reaching back across millions of years, each thin band a season, each shift in colour or in the tiny shells a sign of a warming or a cooling far above, of an age of ice or an age of warmth long since past. Scientists read these cores the way one might read the pages of an old book, working downward and therefore backward through time, learning from the mud how the whole great climate of the world has risen and fallen across the ages. Within that deep and faithful archive lie the very first faint hints of the beginning of life itself. Some scientists now believe that life on Earth may have first stirred far down in the deep sea, somewhere around the warmth of the hydrothermal vents, where the mineral-rich water first met the cold dark and the exact right chemistry could come alive. And if that is truly so, then the deep is not only the very largest home for all of life, but perhaps its first cradle as well, the lightless place where the long story first began. Every single living thing seen in that light traces its own way back to a single warm crack on the black floor, back to one ancient meeting of hot water and cold stone in the deep, a beginning every bit as quiet as the gathering night itself. From that ancient beginning all the way down to the present moment, the deep has held countless hidden secrets, and some of them are even now still only just being whispered to us for the very first time. New kinds of vents and seeps and entirely hidden habitats are found with very nearly every careful expedition, places where life gathers and thrives in surprising ways that no one had ever once predicted, fed by chemistries that we're only just beginning to understand at all. Each new discovery widens the whole picture of what life can truly do, and of where exactly it can manage to live, pushing the old boundaries of the possible a little further out into the dark. The deep is endlessly generous with all its surprises, handing them out only a few at a time, one careful expedition after another, with no sign at all of ever once running dry. And the wonder of all of it can simply wash over you now, asking absolutely nothing in return, easy as the turning of the tide. Let that wonder loosen its hold now and ease further still, for we are drawing close to the very quietest of all the facts. down in the very deepest and oldest water of the whole abyss, almost nothing at all changes for whole long centuries at a time. The very same near-freezing cold, the same complete dark, the same creeping current barely faster than the hour hand of a clock, the same endless rain of fine, pale snow forever settling onto the same level floor. It is perhaps the single most unchanging place anywhere on the entire surface of the earth. One corner of the whole wide world where time moves so faintly that it very nearly stands completely still. To even imagine it is to feel all the rush of the long day finally fall away at last, replaced by a stillness so lasting and so complete that the tired mind can finally, at long last, simply stop all its reaching and only rest peacefully in the unchanging dark. Within that great unchanging hush, even the simple act of breathing finds its own deep and steady form. The deep ocean holds vast hidden stores of dissolved oxygen, carried down from the bright surface above by the sinking cold water and the unhurried circulation, more than enough to sustain all of its many lives across the long dark ages. The creatures down here breathe in their own way, a sea that was first filled with air long ago and very far away, up near the bright living surface, and then carried down into the depths to wait for them. Every single breath taken down in the deep is, in a very real sense, a saved breath of the bright surface, delivered and held safely in the cold. And your own breath, soft and easy and even now, is itself only an echo of that very same long exchange, the surface and the deep forever breathing together. The deep also holds its warmth in certain places we would never once think to expect it, tucked away into all the cold like embers hidden in cooling ash. Far from the great roaring vents themselves, gentler cold seeps release their mineral water out into the surrounding black at little more than the temperature of the surrounding sea, and small pockets of faint warmth dot the floor here and there, each one a hearth a few degrees above freezing around which life can gather close. The deep is not, after all, uniformly cold all the way through. It is instead freckled all over with these mild exceptions, where the creatures cluster in toward the warmth of the earth itself. At these seeps, where chemicals rather than great heat rise from below, whole communities can live for a very long time, fed by bacteria that turn the rising sulfur and methane into food. The same trick that sustains the boiling vents, but cooler and far more lasting. Some of these seep communities are thought to be among the oldest gatherings of life anywhere in the deep, tended for thousands of years by the chemistry welling up from within the earth. To imagine moving between them, from one dim hearth to the next through miles of black water near the freezing point, is to feel just how even the coldest of worlds still keeps small fires burning, and how life everywhere finds its own way to them. Toward those small fires move creatures guided by senses that we can barely even picture at all. Some of the deep-sea animals can detect the very smallest traces of certain chemicals dissolved in the water around them, smelling out a meal or a mate or a distant seep from kilometers away, following a single faint thread of scent through the surrounding black. The entire deep is, to these creatures, a rich and varied landscape made all of smells and tastes, an invisible map laid over the blackness, every passing current carrying its own bit of news. Where we ourselves would find only empty darkness, they find instead a whole world full of signals, full of direction, full of meaning. The dark is never once truly empty to those who have learned how to read it, and the deep is forever speaking, in sense and in glimmers, to anyone with the patience to listen. Listen now to the very gentlest fact of all, the one that ties the whole long journey together. The deep ocean, for all of its great strangeness, for all of its cold and its complete dark and its crushing weight, is at its very heart simply a place of profound and lasting peace. One vast sanctuary where life moves unhurriedly, asks for very little, and endures for whole long ages. There is no rush at all anywhere in the deep, no clamour, no haste, only the unhurried passage of creatures through near-freezing water, the endless fall of fine, pale snow, the distant blue-green pulse of living light. It is perhaps quite simply the calmest place there has ever been anywhere, and to rest the tired mind there, even for just one single night, is to borrow just a little of all its endless stillness. Let the whole body grow heavy now with that borrowed calm. Let the slow breath ease even further until it matches the deep's own unhurried breathing. There is truly nothing left at all now to do but rest. And as the long journey draws near at last to its resting shore, here is the very last and softest wonder of them all, the one to carry gently down with you into sleep. Far, far below everything you have drifted past tonight, far beneath the dim twilight and the deeper dark, far beneath the glowing creatures and the cold creeping currents, far beneath the warm vents and the deep trenches and the endless level floor, the deep ocean simply continues, vast and calm and ancient, exactly as it has done for countless ages, and exactly as it will go on doing for countless more still to come. It does not need us at all to ever watch over it. It does not truly need anything in all the world. It simply rests, immense and whole, holding within itself more life and more water and more stillness than the human mind could ever once hope to hold. A single, great, dark calm lying beneath the bright and busy, thin little world above. And in this one moment, here at its soft edge, you yourself are now a small part of all that great calm, held by the very same stillness, breathing the very same lasting peace. The deep asks absolutely nothing at all of you tonight. It only offers up its great stillness, freely and gently, in just the way that it always has, to anyone who comes at last to rest at the edge of the dark. The long journey through the deep is finished now, and you have arrived, ever so softly, at its very furthest and most peaceful resting shore. There is nothing more at all now to reach for, nowhere further left to go. And if you happen to still be here, lying half awake in the dark, another journey is already waiting there on the screen, ready whenever you might happen to wish for it, or perhaps never at all, for there is truly no need to choose a single thing tonight. You do not have to hold tightly on to any one thing at all that you have heard. Let all the names slip away now, and the numbers and the creatures and the cold and the glow and the ancient deep sliding water. None of it was ever truly meant to be kept. It was only ever meant to carry you here, to this hush, to this stillness, to this resting place right at the edge of sleep. Let it all go entirely now, in just the way the deep lets the fine, pale snow settle to the floor, without any effort at all. Feel the full weight of your own resting body now, heavy and warm and held. Feel the breath rising and falling on its own, slow and easy and even, asking nothing more of you. There is nowhere at all to be now but right here. There is nothing at all to do now but rest. The deep is still, and you are growing still along with it. Let your thoughts go dim and far away now, like the small distant lights of the deep blinking out, one by one. The cold dark water holds all of its creatures, and the night holds you, and all of it is calm and all of it is well. Breathe in, slow and soft. Breathe out, slower still. Let the shoulders fall. Let the jaw soften. Let everything grow heavy and still and quiet. The deep is resting now. The whole world is resting now. You are resting now. And now, 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.